All right, there we go. Hello, everyone. So, I wanted to hit on something that continues to happen, and I actually just met with a couple of officers who are responsible for my immediate area. The swatting thing keeps expanding, and it keeps getting more dangerous with time. Hey, constitutional carpenter. Tim Pool, everybody's favorite beanie wearing live cast, he keeps getting swatted and they keep escalating this. So it appears that possibly a package may have been left there. Now, that hasn't come out yet. Obviously, it's kind of an ongoing developing story. But we've seen a number of issues. And even speaking with the officers who came out this morning, there was a brief discussion about some issues that they've been having with someone not far from me who's doing something similar. And smaller channels are still at risk of this happening too, especially because we're not super well known. And the things I wanted to hit on with Tim and the property that he lives at. So I've worked in protective security and in this arena for some time. So the fact that he has his property combined with, good morning, Joe, with his broadcast studio is a major issue. And at this point, that first breach, I'm kind of surprised there wasn't an immediate ramp up in security. I know that they added some dogs recently to the property, but that's not going to resolve the problem without properly gating everything off and adding a lot of surveillance cameras and a lot of physical security assets, armed security guards, things like that. This is just going to keep getting worse. They've already had people walk into the house a couple of times that shouldn't have been there. They have a very lackadaisical approach to security. I'm sure that's changed a little bit, but at this point, the best thing Tim could do, I hate to say this, is sell the property they currently live at, move, and then distance themselves from their broadcast studio when they're doing live stuff. If they want to still have a small studio that he can work at from home, I get that. But the vast majority of their work, especially when they bring in some more controversial guests, guests that are likely to get them swatted, they need to separate themselves from that space and then again make themselves known to the local responding officers. Now, to the people who continue to do this and think this is funny, that this is humorous to SWAT individuals, they do eventually figure out who you are, and the charges are huge. And the danger factor is immense with all of this. So, as I said, I wish Tim the best with all of this, the ongoing harassment that they keep having to deal with, but he really does need to distance his operation from their living space and then add security to both of those venues. He's rised in prominence to the point where he does need around the clock security, unfortunately, just with the amount of harassment campaigns that have been going on. They need to set up in freedom of stand. Yeah, basically. Regardless of where they set up, eventually people are going to figure out where they are, right? So, and especially with all the video that they've put out of the compound, which was not, I get why they did it, right? They wanted to create more content, show off this cool place they have now, but you almost have a pretty complete floor plan. So people who are looking to harm them potentially now have a good idea of how to move around that property, which with all the trees and the amount of coverage around there, this is where the dogs were a good move, but you need more assets than that. So I hope they've done that. They need to add a gate while they're preparing to move somewhere else. That would be my recommendation on that. It's just, it's too much. And again, eventually they're going to find the people who do this to them, and they will be facing a lot of time in jail. You can look this up yourself, see the people who've been found out for conducting these swatting operations, and they get hammered, and they should, because the last thing any individual needs who's putting themselves out there is to have a Linco Bearcat show up in their front yard. I was joking about that with the deputies. I was like, oh, hey, it'd be great for my subscriber count, but I really don't need that to happen. So this is who I am. And again, I'm small, but the risk is ever present when you put yourself out there on these platforms that this could happen. So if you are a content creator yourself, even if you're a smaller channel, if you're starting to see some growth, if you are doing live streams of any kind, it might be worth letting them know, because they're aware of these concerns and these problems already. And if they don't have your address, they're not familiar with your place, then the likelihood of something catastrophic happening is much, much higher. So I want to move on to Ukraine, hit on that a little bit. I asked those of you out there, I have a few polls going on my channel right now regarding the time of day to do these streams. For example, evening for me is going to be kind of difficult, but I may try and do some of those streams. So what time of day you'd like to see this broadcast, please go vote on that one. And then as far as the type of content you'd like to see me focusing on, the vast majority of you do like the current events, the analysis of current events, that type of thing. And we're going to jump right into it. So if you go vote on that poll as well, I'd greatly appreciate it. It helps me figure out exactly what you guys want to see. So Ukraine, I've seen a number of articles still with people continuing to suggest that they want to pour in to the area and volunteer to fight for Ukraine. The articles today were focusing on volunteers from Africa who have the perception that going to Ukraine will give them a better life. That's how not great a lot of those countries are. One in particular is focusing on a young man from Nigeria who was seeking to join the Ukraine Legion and hope to get citizenship and established. And was complaining about his small living quarters and things like that in Nigeria. And I'm not really sure why he thinks Ukraine is going to be the solution to his woes, because we've seen with a lot of the information coming out about the process, about the lack of equipment. From what we can find out now, based on current information, all the new foreign volunteers are going immediately to Kiev. They'll bring you in, issue you almost nothing. So whatever you bring with you is your equipment. And you can even figure that out pretty quickly because a lot of the native Ukrainians are running around still in a lot of civilian kit, or maybe some light tactical equipment, or maybe some more tactical like 511 or Condor style clothing. And for international law purposes, I mean, even things like armbands are enough to be considered uniform. But I assure you, if you end up in Kiev and Russia does eventually move in there and you're there as a foreign volunteer, you're going to be treated horribly. It's going to be a disaster for you. They likely won't take you prisoner. If you're not in a full-fledged military uniform, they probably won't take you prisoner. They're not going to respond well when they find out that you're not from there. That they're Ukrainian brethren in a sense. They do view them as a Slavic people because they're all really descended from the same tribes and everything. So the ill will towards them may not be as intense from the average soldier. But the foreigners, the Western peoples, or if you're coming in from Africa, they're not going to treat you well. And again, I don't understand the thought process that a lot of people are still having about this, given again what's out there. But it's not a good plan. Yes, I agree. Yeah, if Tim moves, it should be done very quietly. Basically, the only thing that'll break in the news would be a listing of the house. And then they make that transition out of that area because they do have that trailer that they set up for mobile broadcasting. So they could easily operate out of there for a week or two while they get established somewhere else. It just doesn't, what they're doing now is really, really not a good plan because they can be too easily targeted by bad actors. I hope that he brings in some professionals to really assess the current situation, talk to him and be like, hey, there's really no good way to secure this property because it's so well known and the interior is too well documented now. So time to go. On that note, with the Ukraine situation as well, getting back to that, the NATO aircraft that are operating in Poland and Romania, I noticed pretty late last night that it's not likely there are gaps in coverage in the security of these installations. I think a lot of movement is being done while the Western world is sleeping in terms of equipment, personnel, that type of thing, because the transponders for the aircraft are likely being deactivated. It's not that we don't have an ongoing air presence, but at certain points of the day, you'll notice that there's no active helicopters patrolling. And right now there are. In fact, there are a number of helicopters circling around in Poland, U.S. Army ones, There are a number of surveillance aircraft now up in the air. There's an E-8C, Boeing E-8C above Poland that I thought was kind of interesting. They are a battle management aircraft. So they're providing real-time intel to NATO and likely to Ukraine as well. There are some aerial refuelers flying in the area as well in Romania. And some of the reports, albeit anecdotal, that have come out, and we have to take it with a grain of salt, there's a really good probability that when you see one of these transponders, like a C-130 flying or C-17, that there might actually be 3 or 4, maybe even a half dozen other planes flying with them who are moving more materials and personnel into these areas. Now, we know that this is ramping up. This isn't slowing down anytime soon. And the escalation of turning off their transponders at certain times of day, I think, is pretty interesting. The Russians have been smart because they control their own airspace, right? They're not running any transponders on their military aircraft. Their government planes you'll occasionally see pop up from time to time as they make various trips. You've got dignitaries moving around, other different types of movement. And one of the things that I have a sneaking suspicion and have for some time, though I haven't seen anyone really do any investigative work into it, is that a lot of the commercial carriers who are flying into places like Belarus, for example, are likely carrying troops, personnel, and other equipment in as a subcontractor of the Russian government. I'm sure they have ways to federalize their cargo, that type of thing if they need to do it, or just, again, put out bids and contracts just like we do here in the United States. We use commercial carriers to move a lot of military personnel around the world. That's not a secret. That's something that's done very regularly. There's a reason why you see soldiers in your airport very often. If you're traveling, there'll be a whole company there of guys who are moving around the country. Yeah, no, it is a bad idea to mix his housing with his broadcasts. I mean, respectfully, it was kind of naive to put those two things together once he became large enough to be able to afford to buy a place like that. The day and age that we live in, where you have random people who are being swatted simply for posting on Twitter, or what this phenomenon was started by gamers who were getting, they were trash talking someone, and then the next thing you know, lo and behold, now there's a SWAT team there, or these live streamers who, again, they're sitting there chilling, and all of a sudden you hear some noise off in the corner, and then there's an officer with an AR-15 behind the guy who's sitting there with a microphone freaking out. And that really should not, again, that should not be happening. And Tim really needs to sit down with some professionals. And I suspect that there are certain firms that would likely turn Tim down at this point because he's so big, because there is this ever-present risk. And the insurance premiums for a company providing protection to people at a certain level, it's very high. It's very expensive. And he's going to have to spend likely hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on security if he was to do this at the level that he likely needs it now as a public figure. And it shouldn't have to come to that. But when you have groups of people who are very active and wanting to shut down others' ability to speak, and they will do it by any means necessary, that's their mantra, right? Then they will target him over and over again for giving a platform to people that certain individuals really just don't agree with at all. And as anti law enforcement as a lot of those people are, it's very interesting to watch them use the apparatuses of the state in an attempt to terrorize people for speaking. And it's gotta come to an end. And it will. Again, they'll find the people doing this. They will absolutely find them and make an example out of them. And so, yeah, hopefully that comes to a conclusion soon and they find the people responsible for doing it. So we're going to move on. Sorry, just reading through some of the chat. Tim Mad, both his personal home studio swatted the same day, separate states. Yeah, I mean, it was easy enough to figure out where he was in West Virginia, as we saw, where people were able to just freely walk onto the property and then into the house because people aren't locking doors. One of the things they need to do immediately, I mean, at least as long as they're going to stay there while they're in the process of moving out, again, my recommendation, you need to have some type of key card access. All the doors, they need to be they just need to auto lock behind you. In addition to those security elements, building multiple tiers should the perimeter be breached. They need to have a way to lock down the house too, with a couple of button presses or one button. And again, that's why you have to have security personnel there. This needs to now be treated like it's an office space. This isn't a fraternity house or a sorority house. And there's a big difference between the security and those two, by the way. Sorority houses are often a model of how you should do security in a what is essentially kind of like a quasi office and a dormitory and a public meeting place often. Where the fraternity houses are basically this like open mess because nobody cares because it's a bunch of guys. But the girls have all their stuff way locked down, where there's key card access or combination locks and all kinds of different things. Where the fraternity houses, they might have a combination lock, but everybody knows the combo. So it kind of defeats the purpose. But to have the ability, like when Tim dismisses employees or people come and go, having the ability to deactivate their access to that house, and of course denying them entry to the property as well, with having a good gate, having a guard post out front, because they're at the point where they should have at least 2 guards there around the clock. One person in the gatehouse, one person who's always, conducting patrols or sitting in the house with them or right outside of the house while they're doing these live streams. Because this is just, again, getting ridiculous. Tim could totally hire off-duty cops or sheriffs. The difference between that and then going private sector, if you hire off-duty officers and they are working within their district still technically, and that's usually who's going to cover you, they have their radios still turned on. So if a call goes out somewhere else, so in the case of Tim, where people know when he's broadcasting, they can easily call in something bogus down the street from Tim, and then those guys would likely have to respond to it because they're the closest asset in the area. So even when you're paying for them, they're still technically on the clock. So now you're paying $45 or $65 or more an hour for one officer or one sheriff deputy, and they're gone. And now all of his security's gone. He would be better off with private sector solutions that could even staff maybe federal cops, because they're not going to go anywhere. He should definitely get people who have good quality backgrounds and training and make sure that they're vetted thoroughly. Look at their resumes, ask for their resume or their bio from the company, and then even have some of his own friends, because he has guests that he could easily have, that have this background that he could send it to and be like, hey, do you think this guy would be a good fit for my current needs? And then, thumbs up or thumbs down, depending upon what they think. But yeah, they should not be bringing in an amateur firm to deal with this, because a lot of companies do scrape the bottom of the barrel when it comes to staffing, because they're just so desperate to fill sites, which is a huge, huge problem in the industry. You'd be amazed. And I mean, we all see it when we go out, right? Where they're like, what is this? Why is this guy here with a security uniform? What is he going to do if something happens? There's very low standards in the industry across the board. And that's a big, big problem. So now we're going to move on to the energy crisis and what we can do to get a little further ahead of that right now. As I've recommended, fuel storage is always a great solution if you have the space for it. In addition, having a way to generate or store your own power is a great tool to have, especially with the rising costs. If you can even supplement a little bit of what you're doing by storing your own power, by generating your own power through a little bit of wind or solar, highly, highly recommend it. I've got a solar generator I'll be doing a review on in the near future. And I'll be doing a lot of content with that, because with the way the world is heading, a lot of us are going to be forced into using this technology sooner than we realize, I suspect, just based on what may happen with fuel costs. We are looking at right now possibly $200 a barrel could be the norm. There's some rumblings of that from the leader of our last administration. He's suggesting that there's no reason as to why this won't continue to climb, and giving the escalating issues over in Europe, with a lot of countries beginning to double down on not exporting things. We know that everything is going to continue to rise. And if you pay close attention to your receipt every time you shop, of course, you'll notice that the prices continue to climb on everything. Now, the International Energy Agency has put out an urgent call. They put out some action plans that they think that governments should be employing around the world. This includes a 3-day work from home period, which is a joke because a lot of us don't work in fields where we can work from home. They don't care about you. They want more electric cars. More electric cars, of course, are a joke. We have to power them with fossil fuel at this point. That is the most reliable means of producing power besides nuclear, which, of course, most of the world is shifting away from. I don't understand why they want to continue to force us into less and less reliable means of energy production. Do I think green energy is a good option to supplement things? Of course, absolutely. The technology is proven, but if it's your only source of energy generation, and what we saw in Texas was cataclysmic, they couldn't generate their own power. What on earth are we supposed to do if there are multiple storm systems in an area, or there's lots of cloud cover? Like, once the wind speeds hit a certain speed, they have to shut down the wind generation. And if you have an intense cloud cover or a snowstorm, now your solar panels don't work. So not having an alternative, not being able to fire up a gasoline powered generator, you need to combine all of these technologies. They work in great harmony. And if you cut any of them out of the equation, you're screwed. Like the fact that Germany now is reconsidering reactivating one of its abandoned coal fire plants because it's shutting down all of its nuke sites it's ridiculous. Like, that's how they're going to insulate themselves from the rising energy prices. And the fact that we would want to shut down the coal industry in the United States and harm those people when we can absolutely maintain complete energy independence, but we don't want to. That's not the agenda now. The agenda is imported solar panels, imported batteries, and that makes us a lot less safe, a lot less secure as a nation if we are wholly dependent upon imported technology to power the whole grid. We don't make any of this stuff here. People don't get that. It's one of the reasons why, and in this recommendation, they're recommending bike lanes. So one of the things that I was talking about with some friends and I've been looking into over the past couple of weeks and actually months, e-bikes and e-bike conversion kits. There are some that are available that are only a couple $100. And even if you live in a small town, the technology can get you around if you just need to run up to Dollar General or your local general store. If you're in a rural area, if you're in a more metropolitan area that has bike lanes and things, it will provide you enough power if you're pretty close to work to get to and from work and even to the grocery store at this point. They're really good. But we shouldn't be forced into it by rising gas prices. It should be a choice that you make. And if the weather is not good, no one wants to be out on a bicycle if it's negative 20 degrees outside, or you have a torrential downpour. But I think a lot of people, especially the Zoomers, are going to kind of be forced into that. And then their kids are definitely going to be forced into a lot of that. The other recommendations they were making in this list included reduction on air travel, which I think will organically happen anyway because the rising ticket prices with the fuel costs. And you'll see more people dependent upon train travel, which won't really happen. We don't really have a good train infrastructure in the United States for traveling by rail. It's too slow. So if you're going to travel any long distance, it's going to be a major expense and a major burden on your time. And the beauty of the time we live in right now, the stories we'll be telling our grandkids, like, oh yeah, for $80, I could get on a plane. I could fly from coast to coast one way. Why is it that that's going to have to be, and the way that we're heading, it literally has to become a work of fiction. Like, literally has to be like, oh, grandpa, you're crazy. What do you mean you could travel from coast to coast for $80? Like, this is crazy. Yeah. Anonymous, strong men equals good times. And right now we live in a world of weak men. Very, very weak men, very weak people collectively. There's a reason why China and Russia are doing everything in their power to eliminate things from their culture that make men weak. Because a lot of the stuff in our Western world that has poured into their culture. They need warriors because these are the countries that unfortunately are going to rule the world going forward as we become softer and softer. Now, what's happening in Europe right now is about to harden a whole generation of people, probably 2 or 3, as we head into a much harder time and a much lower standard of living. Yeah, growing food, John Doe, absolutely 100% agree with you. I'll be doing some more stuff on food production in the near future. And it's so important that you jump into that. There's a lot of things you can do in containers. There's a couple of things I'm working with right now that grow really well in poor soil. So if you have really poor soil, you can start 2 plants, kaya and Okinawa spinach. They are very, very fast growing plants. Okinawa spinach is very popular in third world countries, and kaya is very popular in South America. There's a few different strains of the plant that you can work with. You do have to boil that before you eat it because it has really high levels of arsenic in it. However, that arsenic keeps bugs away. So it's a very, very resilient plant. So if the grid was to go down and you were unable to obtain the chemicals needed to keep your food production at a really high level, this will just keep going. And you won't have to worry about insects and things going after it. So it could always be a supplement. And once it gets established after a couple of years, I had a kaya tree after like 3 or 4 years. It was massive. And you could literally go out there and pull from it every single day, several times a day. And it just keeps growing back. So looking at plants like that are perennials, that don't necessarily look like food, those are super good to have around your property if you can do it. So moving on to the next thing, with this energy situation, they also want OPEC, of course. The International Energy Agency that I referred to previously is also trying to pressure OPEC into producing more energy. Now, something that flew under the radar with all this that I thought was really interesting is within the last few years, a number of states have actually banned the sale of powerful computers within their boundaries. A lot of people totally missed that because they're a drain on energy. They've been going after, and you can see this where in China, they've been going after Bitcoin miners and other people who have these really large setups or infrastructure. And that's going to crush a lot of the work from home opportunities, right? If you need a powerful computer for what you're doing, you're in a lot of trouble. But they're telling us we have to work from home. So we can see the direction this is heading, right? So if you don't have your own ability to generate power, we've already seen some municipalities in California and things, and the memes have been pretty funny about asking people to withhold from charging their electric cars because it's a strain on the grid. And as I've pointed out previously, imagine if suddenly everyone on your street had an electric car and they have to plug that in. We get brownouts in certain parts of the country when too many people turn on their air conditioner. So we need to all add a giant consumer electronic, again, that relies on imported materials to help ensure our national security. Like, how's that going to play out? Anonymous, it's unfortunate, and Constitutional Carpenter, we can't give up Chinese labor. We can't give up Chinese products. As I would love that. And I've seen a lot of people posting about how we need to achieve independence from that. And I wholeheartedly agree. The fact that there is very little direction in the United States about becoming an industrial economy again, because that would ensure national security for generations. And it will take probably 100 years to become an industrial economy again. But because we've given up that autonomy to so many other countries, we have sacrificed so much. We've sacrificed good quality jobs. We've sacrificed the middle class because of cheaper products. And now that we have to, again, go back to them over and over again for everything we need. I mean, everything in front of me right now, everything around me, like most of the stuff. China, the laptop is China. This microphone is likely China. My little ring light, China. My shirt, I think actually might be USA made. My hat is from China. There's no quick fix to the lack of infrastructure that we have. And if we get cut off tomorrow, and this is why preparedness is so important. This is why you need to put back the technologies that they can use against us and only have to periodically supplement or replace things, because the pricing on all this is going to balloon. I mean, can you imagine if we end up at $200 a barrel for gas, as predicted by our last president? We're already looking at a situation where shipping containers are $10,500 to get them across the ocean. At the height of all the craziness over the last 2 years, 3 years now, they went up to $20,000, and there's projections that they may go in excess of $30,000 to move a shipping container across the ocean. You think that's not going to reflect consumer pricing? You think that's not going to drive the prices up of like the e-bike stuff that I'm speaking on? Because again, you can put together one of these bikes for a couple $100. There's videos on YouTube on how to do this, so you can even keep that charged through solar if you have to. So it's very worthwhile. Yeah, you installed 2 Tesla outlets? Yeah. Well, you're in Wyoming, right? I want to say, is that correct? I know that state is becoming a very different, Emmy. It's changing a lot. I've been to Jackson Hole, and it was always kind of a ritzy, touristy area, at least, in our lifetime, but it's very California in a lot of Wyoming now, which is weird. I mean, if you go to Cheyenne, not at all. Cheyenne is still pretty pure, but there's some pockets. Most really wealthy individuals have at least a ranch as a status symbol in Wyoming, and a lot of them went there to ride out the last couple of years for huge periods of time too, which is kind of, in terms of, if you think for a moment that a lot of these wealthy people aren't preparing at a very high level, you are sorely mistaken. And if they're preparing for something, if they're buying land, if they're getting ready, then why aren't you doing the bare minimum right now? If you're not, you need to ask yourself that question. Why are you not working with what you have at the moment? The other thing too to hit on, by the way, I mentioned the ban on computers, high-powered computers. As we know, California has shifted into this plan. By 2035. They're going to ban the sale of all diesel and gasoline-powered vehicles. That's old news. What kind of barely blipped on the radar here in the United States was a couple years ago, France banned all vehicles that were, Paris banned all vehicles that were 12 years or older that were diesel powered from being driven on the streets of Paris or re-registered, which, from my understanding, was a pretty large number of motor vehicles. They wanted to cut back on the number of cars on their road, and they claimed that these vehicles were not, clean energy. So I suspect on a long enough timetable, they'll go after our means of transportation as well. If you drive a big truck, an old truck, a very reliable truck, or have an older car, they might issue some collector plates for exhibition purposes, but you'll probably be pretty restrained on when and where and how you can use it and which vehicles they'll even allow to be titled. And once that story broke, the fact that I didn't see more people in like the automotive community here on YouTube or other places really raising a concern about this, because I think eventually it will be weaponized, more than likely. They'll declare some type of emergency or whatever the case is to push people off, or they'll talk about how unsafe a lot of those vehicles are because they're older, and they'll find any number of ways to justify doing it. So that's just something to consider when you're vehicle shopping too. I mean, if you have the capability or you have the resources to get into something that's at least a hybrid right now, just with gas prices and possible policy down the road, I would think that would be probably pretty advantageous. Yeah, well, the Cash for Clunkers program, absolutely constitutional carpenter, which the ramifications of that program in terms of the effect on used car pricing, that was felt only until a few years ago, once the inventory finally started to catch up. And now the fact that companies can no longer even complete cars. Like, we're at a point where gasoline-powered cars can't get the technology that they need to be operational. So you want people to be dependent upon an entirely electric vehicle for transportation that uses, again, entirely imported components to operate. I mean, what percentage of Fords, for example, are made overseas, right? Some of the most American vehicles we have are ones that are actually owned by foreign companies in terms of the amount of parts and things that are actually done here and the production that's done here. So yeah, there's no easy solution to this other than to just try and insulate yourself the best you can from the price hikes on all this stuff, and having ways to supplement your travel, because not all of us are triathletes. So again, having an engine on your bicycle would be advantageous. Even if you don't want to go the electric route, which I think is a pretty good option, though of course, if certain events unfold, they may not power up, right? But if you have like a 50cc or 49cc little moped engine on a $50 bicycle, that can get you around town. It can definitely get you around town and where you need to go in a lot of cases. Or even if you have a large ranch property, the fuel efficiency of that's going to be amazing. So anyway, I think that's going to probably about wrap it up for me today. I had a couple other things I wanted to hit on, but I've definitely gone a little longer than I intended. Scrap them for clean air credits. Cap. Yeah, hey, I'm sure that they'll have some type of incentive initially, as they roll any of this clean energy push stuff out, or some type of program to get more and more people on board with it. But they have to force, I think, public opinion in favor of going this route, because so many people are opposed to this for good reason, right? Your most premium electric cars can only go 300 or 400 miles on a charge, which is, sounds fine. I mean, that is fine. But then once you take it on a road trip and then you have to stop at a supercharger for 40 minutes every several hundred miles, because if you're hammering down, you're not going to necessarily get that 300-400 mile range. So you have to plan your whole trip around superchargers, which is also bad for your battery if you were to use that religiously. And as I pointed out too, how many places, if you have to go somewhere for work, or if you go to the mall, or you go to any major shopping center, how many electric charging stations are there? You'll find that a lot of that infrastructure is really just beginning to emerge on any sizable or noticeable way, because, and then even then, those are typically superchargers. And that wonderful bill that was just passed, that $5 billion worth of charging outlets, was pretty laughable when you actually looked at the amount of charging stations that they want to put in versus the ones that legislation will actually pay for. And it will only put in the least expensive ones based on the chargers they want to put in, which are trickle chargers. So you're looking at about 6-8 hours or longer to recharge your vehicle from the ones that they're going to install. Because the nice supercharger ones, those are $50,000, $20,000, $30,000 plus dollars to put in. And it's just not going to happen overnight unless people are not waking up to this fact that they're using this as a major control mechanism. They're going to prevent you from being able to move. And we hit on this the other day a little bit. We hit on drones. We're talking about radios and stuff, and I wanted to put a caveat to that. And some interesting discussion that happened in the comments about the fact that a lot of these drone companies, kind of like those e-scooter rental companies, can set up like a geographical areas where they won't operate. So even using this for reconnaissance or things, right? But that plays right back into electric cars, all that smart technology. What if it becomes a lot easier to control your movement, right? If they determine that they don't want vehicles driving a certain direction because something's going on, and they can cut the power to your car, or the car starts telling you need to turn around or something, right? Like, I hate to go that direction, that conspiratorial, but I mean, in a long enough timetable, what's that show, Dark Mirror, Black Mirror? That seems to be kind of like the template or the formula for the way we're heading in a lot of places. You listen to guys like Elon Musk and a lot of what they want to do, and and don't get me wrong, I like Elon Musk, but some of this stuff is just it's very memey and trolly, which is super funny. But yeah. Anyway, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. If there's anything else you'd like to add before I dip out today. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close things down. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Need to work on some type of outro for this, right? Oh, also, don't forget I do exist on platforms besides this one. Links will be in the description below. I haven't really done a ton with those yet. I'll often mirror videos there, and I'm seeking to grow those platforms. Oh, perfect timing to dip out then. All right, thank you guys.